Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Now there you can see the plaque marking the spot of Tyburn Tree. So here I am in London, just north of Hyde Park. And Tyburn Tree was the main place for executions in London from 1186 up until 1783. So there really was a tree if you go back here long ago. Tyburn was a stream which is a tribute to the Thames, is long since built over. Anyway, people were hanged here. They got the slow drop, they strangled. It said occasionally it took 45 minutes for a person to die of asphyxiation. These were public executions, anyone could watch. So it really was horrific. People could be executed for what we now regard as trifling crimes, just purloining a few pennies. So crimes against property were savagely punished. Crimes against violence were often quite mildly punished so long as it didn't actually result in death, particularly if it was violence against a member of one's own family or one's subordinate. A man beating up his wife, considered no crime at all into the 18th century. Severely beating his children, entirely acceptable, had the right to chastise them so long as he didn't actually kill them. And indeed there was a case in the 19th century where a teacher caned his pupil and he actually beat him to death. And he was found culpable in a civil suit, not a criminal suit. So times have changed just slightly. Anyway, so thieves and all sorts being executed here, famous people put to death here, various people killed for their faith here. Obviously 1533 was the break with Rome, and those who remained Roman Catholics were put to death here in some cases. And indeed there's Tyburn Convent, which is just up that way, about 100 meters on this side of the road. So nuns pray for the repose of the souls of the Catholic martyrs who were done to death here for their fidelity to Mother Church. And indeed some Protestant martyrs were also killed here at the time of Mary Tudor and others, or even under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Extreme Protestants were not appreciated, and so people were put to death for their religious beliefs. So it was a barbaric time, and actually the Islamic way of doing things, severing the head with a single scimitar slice, was humane by comparison. So we talk about the 18th century when Newgate Prison was the main penitentiary in London. Is go along here, go along Oxford Street, you can't see it obviously, roughly 3 miles east is Newgate. So taken to the tumbrils, they're chained up in these carts and they come along here. A jaunty ride, there would be raucous crowds all the way along, the onlookers watching them coming to here, and people crowding around. People had often drinking. It was a carnival atmosphere, and actually the condemned, they'd often been given strong waters to drink themselves, treated to a hellfire sermon the Sunday before, so often convinced they were going to infernal torment for all eternity. It really was just abominably sadistic. These could be children as well. There was no law against executing children until early into the 20th century. So until the 1820s, grand larceny, as in stealing more than a few shillings, was punishable by death. And sometimes malnourished children were put to death for stealing food. And there was a notorious case where a woman attempted to steal some cloth, realized she'd been spotted, put it back. Nevertheless, she was apprehended, sentenced to death, and executed. She didn't actually steal it, she attempted to, and just aborted her attempted theft. People could put to death for loads of things. Until the 1820s, there were over 100 criminal offences that resulted in capital punishment. Starting a fire in a naval dockyard even by accident, cutting down a tree in Downing Street, robbery on a navigable river, strong evidence of malice in children. Notice you didn't actually have to prove there was malice in them, there only had to be strong evidence. Forgery of any kind, punishable by death, and on. Blasphemy, rape, quite a few other offences. And the most detestable act of buggery was punishable by death. And quite flimsy evidence could be used to put people to death. So the jury would come in, they'd hear the case, and then they'd retire to the jury room to consider their verdict. And it would be said they'd be given neither water nor food nor fire until they returned a verdict. Why did fire matter? This is a time before radiators, so they get no heating, and in the winter that might you hurry up. As Samuel Johnson caustically put it, innocent men hang that jurymen may dine, because they, just hurry up, just vote that he's guilty, all right, we'll go out, we'll render a verdict, then we can have lunch. And judges would sometimes hear the case whilst in a crapulous state. I'm not sure if the jurors were stocious as well. So then they'd often wear their finest clothes and attempt to meet their death with stoicism, and that would be applauded by the crowd. And if you paid the hangman, he might give you a long drop, die more or less instantly. However, your clothes were one of the perquisites of his job. Now, people thought that a dead man's hand could cure disease. People sometimes try and touch, if he died from hanging, the hanged man's body, the hangman's hand. That's the condemned hand, not the executioner's hand. Executioners often doing it with a closed face, wearing a mask. Sometimes executioners trying to entertain their victims by making it as painful as possible. It could take up to 3 hours to get through the crowd and the many carts to be here to be executed. And so often their strength would fail them. They'd be dancing a Tyburn jig, as in their hands were tied behind their back so they couldn't try and stop the rope. Their feet were not. So as you can imagine, they'd be flailing and struggling. It was just ghastly. So there's a sadistic element in any society to this day. When one of those big prison vans comes to court after there's a particularly notorious murder, you'll see people jeering and wanting to tear the condemned apart. So it was really savage. Anyway, so then after 1868 there had been no more public executions. After 1783 they were still public. They're often a gallows just outside the prison or on the prison walls, so many people could watch. But 1868 Richard Barrett was hanged for setting off a bomb which killed about a dozen people. And then after that, they were all private, they were all inside prisons, and it went from maximum publicity to maximum secrecy. The Official Secrets Act governed it, and that was that. The executions were not to disclose any of the particulars of what had gone on, and they became very proud of dispatching the condemned as quickly and efficiently as possible, relatively painlessly, so ideally it would break the vertebrae, and that was it. You'd be out like a light. Now, there's probably a myth, probably wasn't quite as instantaneous as we like to think, but it certainly wasn't trying to prolong the agony. So that is Tyburn Tree. Obviously, it wasn't actually a tree after a while. It was a purpose-built gallows. Up to 24 people could be hanged here at once, and the affluent would pay for a seat so that they could have an unobstructed view of the proceedings. All right, so that is enough about Tyburn Tree. Toodaloo.